Jason, your host of the Connetics Onwards and Upwards show. It's Friday and it's 7 a.m., so it must be our weekly show, Onwards and Upwards, everything a healthcare worker needs to know about moving to the United States. I am so excited to be here with everybody this morning. Today's topic is an immigration update. I know everybody has lots of questions. Everybody wants an update. We want to know what's going on. And we have some amazing experts here with us this morning to give us their advice, their expertise, explain everything that's going on. So I'm excited for the show. Please drop comments. Please ask your questions. I'm going to be asking our experts all about everything that we want to know about retrogression, immigration, anything you want to know. Anything you want to know, please drop it in the comments. Please also let me know, where are you watching from? And we're also going to do something a little bit different today. It's the first week in August. I know retrogression, the news, we're going to get into it, but I know it was a little bit disappointing for everybody. But nonetheless, there's still a lot to celebrate in your life. And I want to know, what is everybody celebrating this Friday? For me, it was my grandmother's 80th birthday this week and my husband's birthday. So we had a very busy week in my household, and those were two exciting things we're celebrating. So let me know, where are you watching from and what are you celebrating this week? I want to hear from you. Please apply at the connecticsusa.com/apply. That's our website. So if you're watching the show and you want to come to the US, we are still taking applications very actively. Our recruiters are waiting to help you. The employers are all still hiring. We're going to get into it, but with retrogression, it's just a slight delay. So still coming, still taking applications. So please apply on our website. So without further ado, let's bring out our guests. Good morning, Chris, and good morning to you, Cadence. First time on the show. So excited to have you both. If you want to take a minute just to introduce yourselves and also share, what are you both celebrating this week? Give us some good news. Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'm Chris Masilla. I'm glad to see Cadence is on board here today. So I'm celebrating Cadence with her rookie event here on the show.
That's a good one. Well, we're excited to have Cadence here too. Cadence, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Are you maybe on mute, Cadence? We can see you, but we can't hear you. All right. Well, while Cadence unmutes herself or figures out how to get that sound working, why don't we go ahead and get started? I see we have Chia, who has a victory watching from Nigeria. That's great. We have Joanne watching from the Philippines, Ansha watching from UAE. So we have got a lot of nurses from all over the world watching. Again, drop in the comments where you're watching from and tell me what you're celebrating this week. Let's get started. Chris, I'm going to turn to you. Can you give us the update? What is going on with retrogression and the visa bulletin?
Yeah, so the visa bulletin just came out again, Danielle, just a few days back. We didn't really see any change, and that's not terribly surprising, right? For those of you who've been following this for a while, you'll know that the visa bulletin runs on a 12-month U.S. fiscal year cycle, and the U.S. fiscal year runs from October 1 to September 30th. And so the September visa bulletin is the 12th and final visa bulletin of the fiscal year. And so it's very common in July, August, and September for the visa bulletin to retrogress back quite a bit far. And so this isn't a big surprise. In fact, Danielle, it wouldn't surprise me if sometime in September, the State Department announces that all visas have been used. But it's important for everybody to recognize that that's over the U.S. fiscal year. And the U.S. fiscal year, again, does not run Jan 1 to December 31. It runs October 1 to September 30th. So no one should be concerned about that. Now, the most important bulletin in the recent past and the future is going to be in about 30 days. in early to mid-September, the State Department, usually around the 10th of the month or so, issues the visa bulletin. And the one that is issued in early mid-September, Danielle, is going to be the first visa bulletin of 2024's fiscal year. Again, keep in mind the fiscal year versus calendar year. And so what's important about that is that it will give us an insight as to what the visa bulletin will look like for the next few months after that. The October one is very predictive of future visa bulletins, whereas these summer visa bulletins don't really give us any insight into anything. So that's the state of play with where the visa bulletin is at, Danielle.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you for that update. I know it's hard to even guess, but do you have any guesses what's going to happen in 30 days from now? A lot of our nurses are curious.
Yeah, I totally expect as much.
We're hoping for the best, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you give some background to some of our nurses who are maybe watching for the first time and maybe they've heard these terms, visa bulletin, retrogression, but they don't know exactly what that means? Can you explain what the visa bulletin is? What is retrogression?
Yeah, no, definitely. So retrogression and the visa bulletin are similar concepts, right? The number one thing to know is that the U.S. Immigration system has a quota on the number of visas that it approves in any fiscal year. So that number is 140,000 employment-based visas. So that's not 140,000 nurses. That's not even 140,000 nurses and their families. It's 140,000 employment-based visas for essentially everyone who's coming into the United States to engage in employment or work, and their immediate families. Typically, when we're thinking about this number in the industry, we assume roughly every other visa, maybe even a little more, are spouses and children of the worker, him or herself. So, for instance, if it's 140,000 employment-based visas any fiscal year, we can estimate, and again, it's a rule of thumb, it's by no means precise, about 70,000 of those are workers, and the other 70,000 of those are spouses and kids. Now, that 140,000 number, Danielle, actually for the last 2 or 3 fiscal years has been considerably higher artificially for reasons that aren't worth getting into, in my opinion. And the reason they're not worth getting into is because the State Department has announced that starting with this next fiscal year, we expect the number to go back to 140,000 visas. So that's that issue. That's the quota. Now, what visa retrogression is when the U.S. government receives more applications than there are available for those visas, that the U.S. government has to provide a way to allocate which visas get used. The first thing they do is they look at the category or the prioritization system. So we have employment-based category 1, or what we call EB1, employment-based category 2, EB2, and so on down to EB5. There's a whole complicated allocation of those visas that, again, I'm not even sure I entirely understand. I'm not even sure the government actually really understands it. There's also, on top of that, there are what are called the per country quotas, which also limit the natives of each country's ability to get those visas. And so when the visa bulletin is produced every month, we are able to chart and look and say, okay, if you are a Philippine national whose priority date is January 1st, 2020, you would, of course, be able to come into the United States. Why? Because the visa bulletin for EB3 is May of 2020. Your date is January 2020. The visa bulletin is May 2020. And so you're allowed to move forward to the final stage, which is to say you're allowed to have your appointment at your local embassy or consulate. On the other hand, if it's May 1st, 2020 is the Philippine EB3 date, which again is the date for most nurses, and your priority date is, let's say March of 2021, That is later than the date that's listed on the visa bulletin. Therefore, you must wait until such time as a visa bulletin would be released, which would show a date more favorable than March of 2021. And we can do that with all countries. The most prominent countries that we see are India and the Philippines, China. Those are the countries that tend to get retrogressed. The Philippines actually tends to track generally pretty much the same as what we call the worldwide number, which is essentially every country other than China and India. We sometimes see Mexico pops up on that visa bulletin as well as an individual country. So yeah, so that's sort of the way the quotas work and the visa bulletin works and retrogression works.
Okay, thank you, Chris. That's a very good summary and update and a good background for our nurses. I see Cadence is back with us. Cadence.
Hi, how are you?
There.
Sorry about that. Apparently.
Oh, there we go. I'm so glad the sound is working. Let's try this again. Round 2. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us anything that you are celebrating this week?
My name is Cadence Moore. I'm with Corporate Immigration Partners, and I'm celebrating getting to chat with all of you today. So very exciting. Sorry about the technical issues. Apparently my laptop was not cooperating today. So.
Well, that's okay. We're excited that we got it to work and happy to have you here. So thank you for joining us. So let's turn to the comments. I see we have a lot of people watching. Arlene from Jamaica, Red from Red Qatar, celebrating his good pop-up. Congrats to you, Red. Again, please share where you're watching, anything you're celebrating, and please share any questions that you have. So let's go ahead and take some of these questions. So Cadence, let's turn to you. So I have a question from Joe. Joe says, is premium processing still available even if there is retrogression?
So premium processing is still available for the I-140 stage. The employer may choose to file the case in premium processing to receive a faster decision. Just as a quick reminder of what premium processing is for everyone who may not be familiar, it basically means that the U.S. government will have 15 days to either issue a decision or a request for evidence. The case is received. And then if a request is issued, the government has an additional 15 days. Keep in mind that due to retrogression, some organizations, some employers may decide that it's not a good use of that type of money to file in premium, but it is still an option that's available. So that has not changed in any way.
Okay. Thank you, Cadence. Thank you for that answer. And just for our nurses watching, and just so I understand, I'm going to double check with the experts, Chris and Cadence. So if I file my I-140, whether or not I use premium processing, whatever the date is that it's approved, that's my priority date, correct?
Actually, it's the date that the case is received by USCIS. So similar, slight adjustment there. So,
okay, so the date that my case is received by USCIS is my priority date.
Exactly.
Okay, and then my priority date is important because on the visa bulletin, and maybe we can bring up that graphic again, that's the dates that I use to figure out where I lie. So if my date is before the date on the right-hand side, depending on which country I come from, then I can move forward with my process. But if it's after that date, then I'm just slightly delayed to get my visa interview. Is that correct?
That is correct. So when you are looking at the visa bulletin, you are looking at your priority date, which is found on your I-140 approval notice. And if your priority date is before or on the date that's listed on the visa bulletin for your country of chargeability, you can move forward with the process. If it's after, your case is on hold for this time.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. All right. Let's take another question. I see a question from Aria. Aria is asking, what is a better route for nurses, H-1B or EB-3? Chris, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So like a lot of things, better is a term that you, the nurse herself, have to assess. Maybe we can just take a minute though and talk about the pros and cons of each. So the EB-3, which is the sort of the usual way that nursing cases are filed in the United States, that works very nicely. It upon the issuance of the of the green card upon approval when the nurse enters the United States. She obtains a green card, as does her spouse, as do, by the way, any under 21-year-old children who, and I'm speaking generally here, enter at the same time as the nurse herself. So that's nice because the spouse immediately gets work authorization, and the whole family all have U.S. permanent residency cards, which means they are on the path to U.S. citizenship if they are so inclined to ultimately become naturalized in the United States. So that's one path. I think that's generally been the preferred path. There's one downside, which is with retrogression. What was taking about 9 months is now taking maybe 18 or 24 months. And, unfortunately, I suspect retrogression will continue to get a little worse into 2024 and 2025. So the upside, everyone gets a green card and work authorization. Downside, the timing of the process. On the H-1B side, on the upside, much quicker. If you qualify for an H-1B and your employer is willing to sponsor you for an H-1B, and you have your nursing license and you have your visa screen, and we file your H-1B today, that's great. Today's August 11th. You can probably be in the United States in 60 or 90 days. So super fast. That's what's nice about the H-1B. In fact, that's the real appeal of the H-1B, but there's some downsides. Number one, your spouse does not, the spouse and kids can enter the United States, but they don't get green cards. They get something called an H-4, and an H-4 does not allow work authorization. It does allow children to go to school, though. Normally, though, within a reasonable amount of time, let's call it 6 or 9 months, the spouse can obtain work authorization if the employer is also willing to file your green card and your spouse's green card. So you do not get the green card immediately and your spouse does not get the green card. It's going to take that, let's call it 18 months or 2 years under current processing times to obtain that green card. About halfway through that process, your spouse will be able to obtain work authorization, though. So, it's not great, but it's not terrible. Also, you're not getting permanent residency right away. You're not getting permanent residency again for about 2 years. And I'm speaking for all folks right now, except for Indian nationals and Chinese nationals, by the way. So you can enter the United States, so that's good. But you don't get the green card, which isn't so great. But you will get it eventually. It'll just take an extra 2 years. But here's the big one. Not that many U.S. employers actually are allowed to file for your H-1B. There's two main things that an employer has to meet to be able to sponsor a nurse for an H-1B. Number one, the position that the hospital is offering has to require a bachelor's degree. And you, the nurse, have to have the bachelor's degree. But remember, those are two standards there, not one. Many Philippine and overseas nurses that we see do hold a BSN, a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing, but that's not all of it. The employer in the U.S. has to require a bachelor's degree, and the majority of employers in the United States do not have as the minimum requirement a bachelor's degree. The minimum requirement they have is an associate's degree. Mm-hmm. And so those employers are not eligible to sponsor nurses for H-1Bs. Having said that, I have seen in the many years I've been doing this, more and more hospitals and healthcare facilities are beginning to prefer, and some are even beginning to require bachelor's degrees for some nursing positions within their organization. Mm-hmm. So that's one issue, which is that not that many U.S. employers meet that standard of requiring a bachelor's degree. There's even a second piece to this, which is we have something called the H-1B quota in this country. It operates somewhat similar to retrogression, not entirely, but conceptually, it's the same idea, which is there's a cap on the number of H-1Bs that the U.S. government can issue in any year. And this past year, only about 20 or 25% were allowed to get H-1Bs, which is to say it was oversubscribed. So essentially, we have an H-1B lottery in March. Everybody who wants an H-1B puts their name in a lottery. And again, about 20 or 25% of those were able to obtain the H-1B. The other 75 or 80%, unfortunately, they just lost the lottery. They have to try again in March of 2024. Last piece of this, Danielle, Very few, but certain organizations in the United States are what are called H-1B cap exempt, meaning that those employers who sponsor H-1B nurses, or really any H-1Bs, do not have to go through that H-1B lottery. They're essentially allowed to hire all the H-1Bs that they have job openings for. So again, in sum, broadly speaking, one, position must require a bachelor's degree for an H-1B. Two, it's generally helpful if that employer is what's called H-1B cap exempt. So bringing this all the way back to the question, what's better, H-1B and green card? I think you have to consider your situation. You have to consider the companies that you are applying for here in the United States.
Thank you, Chris. That was a very good overview for all of our nurses. I think the takeaway is that it really depends. It's hard to say. You have to weigh for your individual situation what's going to be best for you, what's going to be best for your family, especially if you have a family that you plan on coming with. So some pros and cons with the H-1B versus the EB-3. Connetics does have some H-1B employers. I will say the majority of our employers are EB-3, but we do have some H-1B employers. We have that option available. So please apply on our website, conneticsusa.com/apply, if you are interested in finding out more about that. So I see we have Crystal, who's watching from Jamaica, who had a family reunion. Hope you had fun, Crystal. That sounds great. I love family reunions. We have Jen from Oman. We have Ta from South Africa. Good day to all of you. We have a good question from Princess, who says, hi, good day, please. Please, what are the requirements? So I think this is a good question for us to bring out our success path and go through what are the requirements for an international nurse? What steps do you need to take to get here? There is a lot of information online. So what we did was take all that information and distill it down into 7 easy steps. So if you are a nurse who is watching and thinking, okay, now is my time, I'm ready to come to the US, this is how you're going to do it. And you can find this graphic on our website if you're interested in looking at it later. So the first step is you must pass your NCLEX. Every registered nurse coming to America must pass the NCLEX. So that is step 1. Step 2 is where you are going to prepare for the interview. So this is where your Connetics recruiter, we call them our career matchmakers, are going to match you with your perfect fit in the United States. They're going to take into consideration, where you want to go. Do you have family, friends? Do you want 4 seasons? Do you hate the cold? Whatever it is, you're going to tell your recruiter, and they are going to help you find a good match. Connetics recruits for employers in every one of the 50 states, and we have thousands of positions open. So that's what's going to happen in step 2. Once you get an offer, you're going to move to step 3, which is the visa framework. This is where we help you get ready for the immigration process, help you gather all your documents, work with your lawyer to make sure that you are meeting all your deadlines. We're going to work also with you in step 4. This is the licensing and credentialing stage. You're going to have a dedicated case specialist who's going to help you get your license endorsement so that you can practice here when you come to the US, get your visa screen certificates. Just make sure you are credentialed and ready to practice when you touch down. Step 5 is going to be the get ready game plan. This is after you have finished your consulate interview, you're doing your happy dance because you are almost on your way to America. You're going to do things like clinical transitional modules. These are modules that you can do online to prepare you for practice in the United States. So you arrive confident and ready to practice. Step 6 is the arrival sequence. This is where you touch down in America. Finally, you are realizing your American dream after all of your hard work. We have the Connetics concierge service. These are people who are going to pick you up at the airport, take you around the town, take you to get a credit card, a car loan, Social Security, get you set up for success. And then step 7, enjoy and prosper. And this is our goal for all of our nurses. So please apply now if you are interested, conneticsusa.com/apply. All right. Let's see. What other questions do we have? So we have a question from Emily. So Cadence, let's turn to you. She says, Will I have a problem at my embassy interview if one letter in my middle name is spelled different in my bachelor's degree from that of my passport? Should I change the spelling of my passport or my degree?
I would start by saying that your passport should reflect your legal name. So if there is an error on the passport, certainly I would suggest changing that. However, if the error is only on the bachelor's degree, that's not going to concern me very much. You shouldn't have any issue at the consulate. Make sure to bring that valid passport with you and your birth certificate showing the correct spelling. And you can always explain to the officer that, unfortunately, the university misspelled your name. And if it's only one letter, it really shouldn't cause an issue. Now, if it's situations where, for instance, maybe you got married and you are potentially have a name change, that is something that you may want to address and have documentation of that name change, such as your marriage certificate.
Okay, thank you, Cadence. And Emily, hope that's some helpful information. So Chris, you touched on Indian and Chinese nationals. I see we have a question here from a LinkedIn user. We can't see the name, but it's a good question because I see there's a lot of question from Indian nationals. And the question is, what are the possibilities for an Indian nationality individual to move to the US, especially when you have to start the process now? Any thoughts for Indian nationals? Like, what can we tell them?
Yeah, so in the interest of time, I'm going to limit this to nurses. Recognize that if you're an allied health worker, or for that matter, other occupations, IT, et cetera, there may be other avenues, but generally we limit these conversations to nurses. I'm also, when I say Indian, I am going to refer to Indian natives. And generally under the U.S. immigration scheme, it goes by not your, we look at both things. We look at your country of birth, where you're a native of, and we also look at your country of nationality. So at our office here, probably at Cadence office as well, we will see, for instance, an Indian native who is currently a UK citizen or a Canadian citizen or something like that. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm only going to talk about Indian natives who are currently and only Indian passport holders, citizens. For those nurses who are Indian natives, they have two options. One is frankly just impossible, which is to file, to get a U.S. employer to file an EB-3 for you. It's impossible because the current visa bulletin is back, 12 years or something. And there's no U.S. employer who is going to file today in 2023 for a nurse who's not going to be able to come to the United States until 2035. So that's, well, theoretically it's an option. It's not realistically an option. Which means you're sort of locked into one option, which is the H-1B. And we talked about that a few minutes ago, Danielle, very briefly. In order for an Indian nurse to get an H-1B, she has to have a bachelor's degree. The U.S. employer has to require a bachelor's degree. And probably, although not necessarily, she will want to find a U.S. employer who is H-1B cap exempt.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chris. Some good information for some of our Indian nationals. We have a question from Jen. Jen says, how long is the process for documentarily qualified? Is it also affected by retrogression? I've submitted my DS-260 since June of 2019 as per the NBC timeframe. It is beyond their processing times. Chris, I see you shaking your head like this. Why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you've had your NBC processing time since 2019, you need to be talking to your employer, and you need to be talking to your attorney. In most instances, nothing should be sitting for, what's that, about 4 years. So that's really the answer for you. It's not 4 years. More broadly, and what may apply to more people who are on the call here, Danielle, if you supplied the NVC with your documents because you were DQ'd and you are retrogressed, the U.S. State Department are not allowed to issue you the interview. So if retrogression impacts you, it impacts you regardless of where you are in the process. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Some good information also on there. So I think another takeaway that I've learned just from being on these shows with all of our amazing immigration attorneys is that retrogression is just a delay. So the process is the same. We are still applying for nurses. People are still moving the same way. You still move through the same channels. You still go through the NVC. You're still going to have your consulate interview. With retrogression, there is just a slight delay. So we're still going to get you here. It just might take a little bit longer. So I see we have a question from Trading Labs India asking about F1 visas. Can you explain about F1 visas? Is that an option for nurses? Cadence, can you maybe explain a little bit on what is the F1 visa?
Yep, an F1 visa is a student visa. So the first important criteria that you'd have to look at is whether or not there's a university that you want to attend in the United States. And that university would have to be willing to work with you to receive that F1 student visa. So that's going to go through the same process that applying to any university would. You'd have to prove your qualifications, be admitted, and then work with the International Students Office to actually receive that F1 student visa. Now, you can certainly get that F1 student visa to attend university in the United States. There's no issue with that. However, it's not going to necessarily provide you an immediate form of work authorization. So there are some opportunities as you complete your program or as part of your program to receive some forms of work authorization, but it will not be immediate. So you would need to be prepared that there's going to be some time where you are truly just being a student in the United States.
Okay, thank you, Cadence. And when you get your F1 visa, is there an option to get an EB3 green card?
So applying on an F1 student visa does not prohibit you in any way from receiving that EB3 green card. Like Chris talked about a few moments ago, there are some opportunities for an H1B if that EB3 is not necessarily immediately available. But certainly if you are a student in the United States on an F1 and you are interested in applying for a green card and you find an employer that's willing to move forward with that sponsorship, there's no issue with doing that. You can qualify for that EB3 without any issue from the F1.
Okay, so some options for some of our students out there that are thinking, how do I get to the US? Maybe it's the F1 visa. Okay, so I have a question from Supriya. Supriya says, at what stage will we get priority date? I have my I-140 approval. I'm confused at what stage retrogression will affect. Will my NVC stage go smoothly even during retrogression? So maybe, we keep saying there's a delay. Where is that delay? Chris, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I always caution with the word delay because delay means, in my mind, that someone's taking an active step to slow down your processing. That's not what's happening. Retrogression is a legal phenomenon that's a law passed by the U.S. Congress many years ago. So no one is delaying your case. Having said that, I understand the mindset. In terms of that particular person, I don't know their specific case. Again, I would greatly encourage them to contact their recruiter, contact their employer, contact their attorney so that they can get specific tailored information about their case. But broadly speaking, if it's retrogression, it impacts every step of the process once the I-140 is approved. Essentially, your case freezes if it's retrogressed after the I-140 approval. Now, from time to time, the NVC will actually ask for documentation, even though you're retrogressed, and that's a good sign because it implies, it doesn't mean certainly, but it implies that the State Department thinks that your case might become unretrogressed, if indeed that's a word, in the next, in the future. And so they want to keep your case moving down the track. So I would take that as a good sign, but it does not mean that your case is not subject to retrogression. So I think I answered that question, Danielle.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for that explanation and giving a little more background. I actually learn something new every time that I participate and watch these shows. So still learning. And I've been doing this for a few years now, everybody. Yeah. There is a lot to it. It can be very confusing, but that's why we have our experts on the show to give us some good free advice. And we are very appreciative of them sharing their time with us. So I see a question from Eulera. Eulera says, hi, do you recruit nurses without working experience but pass the NCLEX? So good news from you, Eulera. We do have employers who will recruit nurses without experience. We have employers who will take new grads. So not every employer will take new grads. It will just depend on your employer and it will depend on what their requirements are. But if you're flexible, we do take some nurses without experience. We do recommend, though, that you have 1 to 2 years of experience. That is going to be what the majority of employers are looking for. So there is some information from you there, Eulara. Let's see what other questions we have in the chat. So many questions, so many people watching from all over. I see Marlone from Oman. I see, okay, Jusel has a question. Cadence, will TN visas also be possible? Can you explain what is the TN visa and if the TN visa is a possibility for our nurses?
Yep. So a TN visa is somewhat similar to an H-1B, but with some different requirements. To qualify for a TN visa, you must either hold Canadian or Mexican citizenship. So that's the first criteria. And then you must be entering the United States with an offer of employment from a U.S. employer to perform as a registered nurse. It is a type of visa that will allow you to enter the United States. It will allow you to work as a registered nurse in the United States. It is not a form of permanent work authorization. So what that ultimately means is you should expect that you're going to have to continue to file some TN renewals with the assistance of the hospital you're working for. But it is an opportunity to actually enter the United States, start working. There's some specific criteria in regards to the TN visa and how it pertains to the green card process, which I'm not going to get into here because it's a little bit lengthy. But I would just urge you that if you are on or considering a TN visa, you should talk to your employer or your attorney about what impact that may have in regards to a future green card process.
Okay, thank you, Cadence. So I know there are some Canadian, Mexican nurses who are watching, very interested in the TN visa. Can you maybe give just a couple of, pros and cons for a nurse who would be coming on the TN visa?
Yep. So the pros would be you're able to enter the United States and start working. That's absolutely a benefit right there. The potential con is, first of all, any spouse will not have work authorization on the TD visa, which is the dependent visa to the TN. The other potential con is your green card process may look a little bit different than typical EB3 filings, just due to the fact that you are on a TN visa, and how it potentially may impact that green card. But overall, I don't think any of that outweighs the benefit of actually entering the United States and being able to work here on that TN visa. So don't be scared of those potential things. Just, be aware of them and talk to the employer or the attorney about them. But it does provide a great opportunity to actually start working here in the United States.
Thank you, Cadence. Yeah, as Cadence said, a TN visa can be a much faster option for our nurses. So if you're watching from Canada or Mexico and you're interested in the TN visa, please apply at conneticsusa.com/apply. We have a lot of employers who are very interested in bringing Canadian or Mexican nurses. So if that is you, please go ahead and apply and we would love to help you. So I see there is a question from Imran. Imran says, hi, I'm Imran, a medical lab tech question is if I come to the US on an H-1B visa, after how much time can I transfer it to a green card visa? Chris, do you want to go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, so the short answer is there's no timeline around it. Maybe a longer answer is you do need to talk to your employer, or they need to sponsor you for the green card. Many employers do like their H-1B workers to maybe work at the facility for, I don't know, I've seen maybe 6 months or 9 months before they're willing to move ahead with your green card. So it's a second issue. And then a third issue is when a employer who's new to the green card space begins the green card, the first thing they have to do is file something called the prevailing wage determination. And that takes 6 to 8 months to get certified. And so an employer may be waiting on that prevailing wage determination certification before they can file your green card, which means they are actually preparing to do your green card. It's just they have this long lead time before they're legally eligible to file for your green card. So those are three components of it. Number one, legally, there actually is no timeline, no bar. Two, employer can set their own internal timeline. And again, my experience is not uncommon for 6 or 9 months to be sort of a testing period. And three, Even if the employer has begun your process, it may not appear like they've begun the process to you because they have to do this pre-step, which is getting a prevailing wage determination filed and certified.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So a few considerations when you're thinking about transferring for an H-1B to a green card. My takeaway is that it is possible. So if you come here on an H-1B, if you come here on a TN, it is possible to transfer to a EB3 green card. So I see a question from Jusel. It looks like a follow-up to the TN question. Jusel says, how about if an EB3 is being processed already? Is it still okay to process a TN visa or an H-1B? So can you do that? Cadence.
So let's talk about the H-1B first, because that's somewhat more of an easy answer. Yes, an employer can still sponsor you for an H-1B. And it would have to meet all the criteria that Chris talked about a few moments ago in regards to the fact that you have that bachelor's degree in a related field and that the employer actually requires that field. So H-1B, there's no issue there. If you already have an EB3 green card process in place, one thing that is important to note with the TN visa is that it is not a dual intent visa. And what that means is that you are not permitted to both have the intent to enter on a TN visa and the intent to remain permanently in the US on a green card. Now, what that means for you in a long term is that it's somewhat dependent upon how your green card case was filed. If the EB3 case was filed with a request for consular processing, which the majority would be if you are still abroad, then there may still be some opportunities for you to enter the United States on that TN visa. But you should be aware that you'll need to work with your attorney and employer pretty carefully, because we want to avoid any conclusion by the US government that you violated the intent issue of a TN visa, that you entered to receive a green card and not to only work here temporarily. So, that's kind of some broad information for you, but I would really urge you to reach out to your employer and your attorney to ensure that you're taking the necessary steps to enter on a TN successfully without violating that intent issue.
Okay, thank you, Cadence. So if you are watching, I think, the takeaway is consult with your experts, consult with your attorney, consult with your Connetics case specialist. On the attorney side, both Chris and Cadence have many years of experience. Connetics has been doing this for over 16 years. We're now part of AMN Healthcare, which is a publicly traded company in the United States. So you are coming with a company that you can trust, and you should definitely take advantage, ask your questions, make sure you're getting advice from the experts who have been through this. We've been doing this for a long time. I see a question from Fadize. Fadize says, my daughter will be 20 in February of 2023, is 20, because it's already February 2023. And I'm by the DS-260 phase. Will she be able to come to the USA if we are further retrogressed? If dates do not become current in October, what do you advise for my situation? I think a lot of our nurses are watching and asking, will my dependents be affected by retrogression? So Chris, why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, so the answer is maybe. We have to know what the visa bulletin and whether or not the interview happens. Now, again, and this is something that I think Cadence and I are both stressing here today. With these kinds of questions that are so critical for you and your family, I'm glad you're asking them in this forum. That's good, but really you should be talking to your recruiter, your attorney, and your employer so they can give you specific advice about your specific case. More generally, any child who is over 21 on the date that they receive U.S. permanent residency. If they're under 21, they receive U.S. residency. If they're over 21, they don't. There's basically no exceptions or anything to that. So on some level, in this case here, I think she said February of 24, the child will turn 21. If the daughter has not entered the United States before that date, she will not be able to obtain U.S. permanent residency. Having said that, there is one broad exception called the Child Status Protection Act. I don't even want to get into it. other than to say, this is why you should talk to your attorney, your recruiter, your employer to see how that applies to you. In some instances, it can add a little bit of a time beyond the actual technical 21st birthday. Again, there's a little bit of nuance to it. I think going through it on this forum is not a really good idea. I think it may end up confusing more people. But if it's close, there may be an opportunity to use the Child Status Protection Act to get a kid who's just a little over 21. But otherwise, unfortunately, that child is going to need their own avenue to obtain U.S. Status.
Okay. So it sounds like dependents are included in retrogression. They are affected by retrogression.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So I see a question from Chidinma. Chidinma says, I'm the principal candidate. Will my green card be issued to my spouse as well? So why don't you go ahead and take that one, Cadence?
You can certainly include your spouse in the green card application process. And if you include your spouse, he or she will ultimately receive a green card with you as well. There's no issue in proceeding in that direction. You want to ensure that you're telling your recruiter and your employer that you are married, so that they can include that spouse in this particular green card process. But as long as you do so, that spouse will ultimately receive a green card along with you.
Thank you, Cadence. So that is the very unique special opportunity with the green card. If you are issued a green card, you can come with your spouse and you can come with any dependents under the age of 21. So that is a very unique opportunity for our nurses. I see kind of a follow-up question. I'm going to ask you, Cadence. I see from JR, what if I become married after the I-140 is filed? Can I still add my dependents?
Absolutely. So what will need to happen is you will need to inform your employer and the attorney that you are now married. They can submit a very easy inquiry to the National Visa Center asking that your spouse be added to the case. And generally, we like to include things such as the copy of the passport of your spouse and then the copy of the marriage certificate to prove the relationship to you. But with those items, the National Visa Center has been widely approving the request to add spouses.
Okay, so good news for you, JR. You can go ahead and get married and you can add your spouse and you can both come to America. All right, let's see if we have some more good questions in the comments. I see a lot of questions. There's a lot of people asking. We're going to run through as many as possible, and then we will also go through the comments and try to answer the questions after the show if we don't make it through all the questions. But please add your questions in the chat. We are happy to help everybody, give free information. That's what the Onwards and Upwards show is all about. So we have a question from Nada. Nada says, can someone request a case that's documentarily complete to be transferred from one agency to another? So can you transfer from one agency to another? Is that a possibility, Chris?
Right. So a couple of things here. Number one, agencies don't sponsor agencies don't sponsor nurses. So the question sort of doesn't make much sense, number one. Number two, you signed a binding contract with a U.S. employer. Generally speaking, those contracts do bind you to the employer that you filed for. So you'll want to check that to make sure you're eligible to do this. Number three, if the question was, can you change when you're documentally qualified to another U.S. employer? The answer is, broadly speaking, no. That other employer has to begin the process all over from the beginning, file a new I-140, go through the DQ process, and then get your embassy interview. Listen, some embassies may allow you to walk into your visa appointment with the new I-140 that's approved, but you're definitely going to need a new I-140 approved. And generally speaking, my experience is you're probably going to have to go through the NVC process again. You can perhaps recapture the priority date, so you may not lose your spot in the queue. But as a general rule of thumb, it's pretty rare that it would be smart for someone who's that close to the end of this process to try and change horses.
So I don't know. So that's good information for anybody who is thinking about doing that. And we definitely encourage you not to do that, especially after spending a lot of time going through your process and committing to an employer. But I think this question was just, can you transfer from one embassy to another? even if you have the same employer? Is that a possibility? Or do you just, you interview at one embassy and what you're assigned to is where you go? You know, maybe somebody's living in a different country and they want to do the interview at a different embassy. Is that a possibility at all? Bryce?
You know, you can do that. As a general rule of thumb, I don't recommend it in most instances. I have found that it takes an extraordinary amount of time to do that. And there's so many different things that have to happen that, again, I generally don't advise it. But again, I'm speaking generally. Your instance may change. But under no situation should you try and do that yourself. You want to involve the attorney, the recruiter, and the employer. Again, my experience is, generally speaking, it makes more sense for you just to fly to Manila, even if you're working in Australia. Generally speaking, that's going to be a better approach. But again, there's exceptions for everything, which is why you probably want to talk to your attorney.
Consult the experts is, I think, a big takeaway from today. Consult your attorney, consult your case specialist. You know, leave it to us. We've been doing this for a lot of time. Happy to help, advise all of our nurses who are watching worldwide. But you definitely want to take advantage of these people who are on your side. So I see a question from Jeff. Jeff says, what is Connetics' minimum bedside experience? I graduated BSN 2011, but have not practiced nursing yet. At the moment, I'm reviewing for the NCLEX, and once I pass, I intend to do bedside nursing. So Jeff, you know, we definitely want to suggest to you to apply on our website and discuss with our recruiters what your options may be. Generally, we'd like our nurses to have 1 to 2 years of experience, but we do have some employers who are open to taking some nurses who are new grads, who may have a gap in their practice. You might be able to do a fellowship. So it's really just going to depend on your specific situation, as I explained earlier. But you can apply on our website, conneticsusa.com/apply, and our recruiters can help find a good match for you if there is an employer out there that meets your criteria and you meet their criteria. Let's see. We have so many questions in the chat. We're trying to get to all of them. Let's see. I have a question from Denise. Denise says, I just finished my DS-260, and because of retrogression, our papers are on hold. I'm here on a U.S. visitor's visa. Can I travel, or is it advisable for me to travel in the U.S. As a tourist for a short holiday? So can Denise travel? Cadence, you want to go ahead and take this one?
So my advice when you're on a visit is that you certainly should not be entering the United States once the green card process has begun for you. And that goes back to the ideas I was talking about a few moments ago in regards to intent. So similar to the TN visa, when you're here as a visitor, you have the intent to remain here permanently on a green card. You know, if you are already here and the green card process has started for you after you entered the United States, I would urge you to talk with your attorney and employer about best options, but certainly at a very low level before the visitor visa expires. So before your I-9 United States expires, you are going to want to depart the United States. And you certainly should not be re-entering the United States while this green card process is pending. So if you're here now, you know, there may be some opportunities for you to travel to a different state domestically, but no traveling internationally, and certainly not re-entering the United States since this green card process has already begun.
Okay, thank you, Kaden. Some good information for our nurses who might be here on a visitor's visa. So if you are joining us, I also want to share, we have some EB3 TN visa and adjustment of status guidebooks on our website, conneticsusa.com/guidebook. There's some information there on the process. What is the EB3 green card? What is the TN visa? What is adjustment of status? You can go ahead and learn more. Those are free guidebooks, so feel free to download them, share them with your friends. Make sure to share this show with your friends. You know, pay it forward for other nurses who might not have this information. This is free information for nurses. We have 2 excellent attorneys sharing all of their expertise with us. So go ahead and share that with your friends so that they can also stay up to date. So I have a question from Maravik who says, can I retain my old priority date in 2008? So is it possible to retain an old priority date? Chris?
Generally, yes. If you have the I-140 approval notice documenting that you have the priority date, yeah, not too hard. Cadence and I do it with a lot of frequency. So it's not too hard. If you don't have the I-140 approval notice, the first thing we recommend is you go back to your employer who filed your case back in, I guess, 2008, see if they can get you a copy of it. We get this request sometime in our office. I presume Cadence does as well. But increasingly something that's that old, it's no longer on our system. Which means your third option is you can work with your attorney to file something called a FOIA, which stands for Freedom of Information Act. And ordinarily the US government, granted it does take some time and costs a load of money, but they can find your file from, in that case, 15 years ago, which will serve as proof that you did have this old approval notice. So those are your options. But broadly speaking, that's a great option for people.
Okay, so some good news from Maravik. Yes, you can retain your old priority date. Talk to your case specialist, talk to your attorney, and they can advise you on how to go ahead and do that. So we have a question from Jed. Jed says, what will happen to a license if it becomes inactive before arriving to the States due to retrogression? So Jed, this is more of a licensing question, but we have a full licensing team on the Connetics team. Once you apply to Connetics and you have an employer, our case specialist will be able to advise you and help you figure out how to, best work your situation. Again, that's ConneticsUSA.com/apply for all of our nurses who are watching and ready to come to the United States. As I keep saying, we have thousands of open positions. There are so many employers all across the US who are looking to bring international nurses. So now is the time. Now is the time to apply. Don't delay any further. Get started on your processing. We like to say on the show, control what you can control. You can take your NCLEX. You can apply with an employer. You can get started on your American dream. So I see we have a question from Peter. I think we might be able to take a couple more, but we have this question from Peter. We've kind of already touched on this, but let's give Peter a straight answer. Peter says, does NVC still process our papers until DQ, even during retrogression? Thank you. So Cadence, maybe you can take that one.
So it goes back to the idea that Chris was talking about a few moments ago, that in some situations, the NVC may still make some, civil documents, completing a DS-260 or paying fee bills, even if your case is registered. And that is a good sign. We like that sign. But ultimately, it is also possible that if your case is retrogressed, that once the I-140 is approved, your case is kind of frozen in place until that retrogression eases. So if you hear from the NVC requesting those fee payments, requesting civil documents, having you complete the DS-260, take that as a good sign, but expect that may not necessarily occur due to retrogression.
Okay, thank you, Cadence. So some good information for you there, Peter. So I think we are almost at the hour. So thank you to Chris and Cadence for being guests on our show today. It was great to talk with you both. Thank you for answering all of our questions. Thank you for giving your time. I know our nurses really appreciate all the free information. Once again, if you're watching all around the world, please feel free to share this with your friends. We do an immigration update once a month. So next month's updates could be very interesting. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope for some good news. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Cadence, for joining. We have our schedule of shows for the next month. We're going to run through. We have next week our Connetics Career Day. So this is speed dating for an international nurse. We have some incredible employers who are actively recruiting right now, and they're going to come on and share why you should apply to work for them. So that's next week. I'm excited for that. I'm going to be hosting that. On August 25th, we have our stateside Northeast. So a lot of questions about working in the Northeast. So check that out. September 1st, we have our CGFNS English exams 1-year check-in. September 8th, understanding your job offer. September 15th, immigration Q&A. So that should be a big one, a good one. So fingers crossed. And September 22nd, another stage stride show. And then on August 15th, we have our LaFord talk show, Working Along Preceptors. We also have our Connetics College. That is every Monday at 6 a.m. Pacific. With all of our partners who are sharing free information with you on the NCLEX and on the English exams. We have classes from Aspire, Swoosh, iPass, and 9.09ers. So definitely check out those free classes. We also have our Connetics initiatives. So we have a free English scholarship for all of our Connetics nurses. If you apply to Connetics and you are one of our nurses, you will be given a free English review course. We have a lot of success getting our nurses through the English, doing that free course. We have our $1,000 referral fee extended until August 31st. So if you know any nurses with NCLEX, feel free to refer your friends, your colleagues, and get that $1,000 referral fee. We have our podcast, Nursing in America. We have a nurse aid program, and obviously we have our registered nurse program, our Onwards and Upwards live show every Friday at 7 a.m. Pacific. Everything a global RN needs to know for coming to America. So check us out every Friday. Our Connetics College every Monday at 6 a.m. Pacific. And we are also hiring for allied. So if you are a med tech, a medical lab technician, any of the allied positions, we have lots of employers all over the U.S. that are looking to bring you to the U.S. So once again, that's conneticsusa.com/apply. Our recruiters are on hand, ready, and excited to take your applications. So happy Friday to everybody. Happy Friday to all of our nurses watching worldwide. Thank you for joining us this morning, and onwards and upwards. We will see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.